This is Pittsburgh Sunday Morning. My name's Sean McDowell. If you'd like to be a guest on the program, if you're the member of a group or organization that has an upcoming cause or event that the listening community would be interested in, doesn't necessarily have to be a local cause or event, doesn't even have to be a nonprofit cause or event either. Contact me. My name again is Sean McDowell. My email address is my name. You spell Sean, S-E-A-N, Sean at DVE.com. I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. Welcoming to Pittsburgh Sunday Morning for the first time, it's our friends from the Airlift Research Foundation, and the president of the foundation is with us this morning, Dr. Susan Lephart. Hi, Dr. Lephart.
Hi, how are you, Sean?
The Airlift Research Foundation, www.airliftrf.org, and a phone number is 412-661-7538. Their mission is to fund research and champion awareness that improves the care of military and civilian survivors of traumatic extremity injuries. So, Dr. Lephart, we're talking about the mangling, the severe damage that would occur to the hands and arms, the feet and legs, mostly to soldiers in battle. But you guys also address traumatic extremity injuries that may occur to a civilian, say like maybe in a car accident or an industrial accident, an explosion in a coal mine maybe, or on an oil rig, instances like that?
Yes, exactly, Sean. We really are finding, and I think this is true historically, that research that's funded specific to military trauma a lot of times has a wonderful specific effect for all civilians as well.
Uplifting lives through limb trauma research. And speaking of soldiers, approximately 82% of all war injuries from Iraq and Afghanistan involve extremities, and 6% of those involve amputation. And again, we're talking about hands, arms, feet, legs. The cost for orthopedic injuries, traumatic extremity injuries, during the current conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, the cost has been estimated at $65 million in direct care, and then $169 million in disability costs. So obviously, Dr. Lephart, tragically, as a soldier or a civilian, you suffer that severe damage, extremity damage, or you have one of your extremities amputated, a hand, an arm, a foot, a leg. For a lot of people, that means you're going to need special care for the rest of your life.
Truly. We really like to feel like we exist to breathe hope into the lives of those who are suffering those types of life-changing orthopedic injuries, and hope that through the research that we're funding, we can start to make some of those differences.
Dr. Lephart, unfortunately, research into the area of orthopedic trauma has not kept pace with the increase in injuries, so a whole lot of injured service members are facing a new battle of recovery, rehabilitation, and re-entry to civilian life, or a return to active duty. And who can imagine, unless you've experienced it yourself, losing or having one of your hands, your arms, your feet, or legs, losing an extremity, or having it so severely damaged it's never quite the same again, and then trying to re-enter either civilian life or go back to active duty as a soldier, which would be impossible almost.
It's true. And I do think that many people don't realize the significant numbers of troops that are coming back with these types of life-altering injuries, and their ages really are pretty young. And so I think all of us are going to be significantly affected by these types of traumas as we are trying to see these young people reintegrated into civilian life. And surprisingly, Sean, a lot of them do very much want to go back to active duty, and do frequently try to go back to active duty.
Is that right? Even though they've had an extremity possibly amputated or severely mangled or damaged, they still want to go back to be a soldier?
Absolutely.
Our special guest this morning, it's Dr. Susan Lephart. She's the president of the Airlift Research Foundation. Their mission is to fund research and champion awareness that improves the care of military and civilian survivors of traumatic extremity injuries. And again, we're talking about the severe damage or amputation to hands, arms, feet, legs. Again, mostly this sort of injury happens to soldiers in battle, but also traumatic extremity injuries may occur to a civilian, possibly in a car accident, an industrial accident, an explosion in a coal mine maybe, or on an oil rig, uplifting lives through limb trauma research, and research funding improves treatment outcomes and decreases complications during recovery. So, Dr. Lephart, this means faster recovery from injury, greater return to duty rates. As you just pointed out, so many soldiers that have gone through this traumatic extremity injury, they in fact do want to go back to being active duty soldiers. Also, along with faster recovery, improved quality of life after service.
Yes, exactly. I think it's really a two-pronged thing, Sean. We really see that it's going to improve their recovery, improve their reintegration back into civilian life again. And also, there really is a monetary aspect of this as well, because as you mentioned, there's a significant amount of money that's being invested in the direct care as well as the long-term care. And if we can address this through improved research outcomes, we hope that we can not only improve the lives of those who are serving so bravely for us, but also reduce the cost that's associated with that.
The Airlift Research Foundation understands the need to support critically needed innovative research that returns injured troops and civilians to maximal function, empowering those who have lost their limbs or lost their limb function. And the Airlift Research Foundation helps to invest public funds into the careers of the world's best and brightest clinician scientists so that advances will be made in orthopedic trauma medicine. And right now, Dr. Lephart, the Airlift Research Foundation is funding projects of young scientists that address the protection of limbs, I'm assuming out there on the battlefield, mostly?
Yes. We're directly looking at research that will make a difference in a 5 to 7 year window in the direct care of those on the battlefield.
Also, the treatment of traumatic orthopedic injuries in the field, rehabilitation, and quality of life. And we were talking about the numbers. 82% of all war injuries from Iraq and Afghanistan involve extremities, speaking of arms and hands and feet and legs, extremities that may be severely damaged. 6% of those injuries involve amputation. I know they've made so much progress as far as the treatment of traumatic injuries in the field of battle compared to, say, the Vietnam era, to how injured soldiers are immediately treated in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's been, 35, 40 years, and I know great progress has been made.
Absolutely. The interesting thing, it's kind of a not-so-great story in some ways. The development of the body armor, which has really been specific to these conflicts, has really provided these types of injuries from IEDs, those improvised explosive devices, to people are surviving those types of traumas now, which are very significant. However, they're surviving it with a lot of trauma to the extremities because they're not protected. The core of the body is protected, so the vital organs are, and they can survive that type of trauma. But their limbs are not protected in the same manner, and so they're really suffering a lot of different types of trauma. The thing that's interesting to me is people think about amputation relative to this, and the amputation number, 6% as compared to the 82%, really is relatively low. The reason being that there has been a good bit of research that's been done in limb salvage, and that's been one of the things that's really been an emphasis in these conflicts. However, what we're really seeing is that the limb salvage approach is good initially, but a lot of times those limbs that have been salvaged are not really functional. And so those eventually lead to amputation or will end in amputation.
Uplifting lives through limb trauma research. It's the Airlift Research Foundation, www.airliftrf.org, and the phone number is 412-661-7538. The president of the foundation is with us this morning, Dr. Susan Lephart. The mission is to fund research and raise awareness that improves the care of military and civilian survivors of traumatic extremity injuries. Dr. Lephart, the Airlift Research Foundation was founded here in Pittsburgh and is based here still as well?
Correct. We were founded here, began in 2008, and we're based in Pittsburgh, intend to stay in Pittsburgh, but we do fund nationally.
The Airlift Research Foundation leading the charge to fund orthopedic research and to increase public awareness of these traumatic war injuries of military and civilian survivors worldwide. And like we just pointed out, research funding addresses the protection of limbs, as Dr. Lephart was just talking about, treatment of injuries on the field, rehabilitation, and quality of life research that has immediate benefits for war survivors and future benefits for all orthopedic trauma patients. Raising public awareness ensures that both the military and the public understand the enormous impact of extremity trauma, both in the field and at home. And again, www.airliftrf.org. 412-661-7538. Dr. Lephart, as I understand it, the history of the Airlift Research Foundation and also the continuation of the Airlift Research Foundation, it's directly connected to the Aircast Foundation. Now, that's an internationally recognized leader in translating donor dollars into real scientific progress.
Correct. The Aircast Foundation was a private foundation that was created from the Aircast Corporation. The family really wanted to make a difference in orthopedic research. And the history of the Aircast Foundation really is what prompted the board of that foundation to create the Airlift Research Foundation to make a larger difference in the care of extremity trauma.
The founder of the Aircast Foundation, Glenn Johnson Jr., he's the one who had this vision to foster the careers of young investigators, clinicians, and clinician scientists by helping them to shed light on some of the most complicated problems and difficult challenges in the field of orthopedics. That would be him, Glenn Johnson Jr., the founder of the Aircast Foundation.
Yes, he unfortunately is no longer with us. His son, Glenn Johnson III, is the president of the Airlift Research Foundation, and really he and his sister were the two that were the impetus behind the seed funding from that private foundation to create this public charity. The whole impetus behind that, Sean, was the realization of the 82% of injuries that are coming back that are specific to extremity trauma, and the fact that the research and the associated funding was not really able to keep pace with that number of injuries. The history of the Aircast Foundation was really quite remarkable in that they funded 40 young investigators over a 10-year period, invested about $3.9 million in their careers. And those young investigators were able to take that initial seed funding and bring back tenfold that amount of money that they were able to get from extramural funding sources to invest in their careers. So that for us really was a marker that showed us the peer-reviewed, rigorous scientific review process that they established as the Aircast Foundation was really working to pick the best and the brightest scientists who could then parlay that initial investment in their research to bring in enough money to really get their research careers online to make a bigger difference in the area of orthopedics.
Well, with these young scientists, the best in their field, of course, they do need funding, and research funding addresses the protection of limbs, which is what we're talking about this morning. Traumatic war injuries, traumatic extremity injuries. Research funding addresses the protection of the limbs, the treatment of injuries on the field, rehabilitation, and quality of life. We were talking about some of the most complicated problems and difficult challenges in the field of orthopedics, and I guess we're talking mostly soldiers here again. However, when civilians get into a very dangerous situation, like maybe a car accident, an industrial accident where they're severely injured, including their extremities, we were talking about some of the most complicated problems and challenges in the field. Everything from antibiotic treatment and infection control to improved amputation techniques and outcomes. And nobody wants to hear the word amputation, Dr. Lephart, and yet you pointed out of the 82% of all war injuries now returning from Iraq and Afghanistan, 82% of them involve severe damage to extremities, hands, arms, feet, legs. And yet the 6% that involve amputation, that is still a pretty low number.
Correct, as compared to some of our earlier conflicts. And I do think that in large part, is relative to the limb salvage techniques that some of the earlier research has helped us to be able to provide to these victims of this type of trauma. Unfortunately, not always are we seeing the limb trauma or the limb salvage technique be as successful as we would hope, which is another indicator for us of the need for this type of research so that we can improve that in a further way.
There are currently thousands of both veterans and civilians needing immediate and ongoing treatment for traumatic orthopedic injuries and amputation. And Dr. Leppard, can any regular person like me make a difference with a donation to the Airlift Research Foundation? Your mission, again, funding research and raising awareness that improves the care of military and civilian survivors of traumatic extremity injuries. How would just an individual like me make a difference?
You know, Sean, I believe every individual can make a significant difference if you choose. Any amount goes to research. We are a young organization, and we are looking for donations from all different sources. We've been very fortunate to have the support of Congressman Mike Doyle, who's located right here in Pittsburgh, with some initial funding through a federal appropriation from the Department of Defense. And that really allowed us to get our first research grant cycle up and running in 2009. That was significant for us as a young organization because we needed that to get up and running. And we really are looking for personal donations from individuals. Obviously, the foundation community here in Pittsburgh has been tremendously supportive of us, and we're also beginning to see some support from international and national corporate institutions who are interested in what we're doing as well.
Oh, great. Just last week, we had our friends from Operation Troop Appreciation, OTA. These are the people that send over the wish list packages to all the soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq. Just simple things, as simple as baby wipes, deodorant, toothpaste, because a lot of these soldiers are stationed so far away from any sort of civilization, and they really appreciate the simplest things, a toothbrush. And they pointed out to me that Pennsylvania currently has the highest number of deployed soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan of any state in the country.
That's correct. And they've been deployed more times than any other state as well.
Multiple deployments.
Exactly.
There are more soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan from Pennsylvania serving right now than from any other state in the country. And again, all donations to the Airlift Research Foundation help to fund orthopedic research and to increase public awareness of traumatic war injuries to military and civilian survivors worldwide. It's www.airliftrf.org, 412-661-7538. The president of the Airlift Research Foundation is with us this morning, Dr. Susan Leppard. And the Airlift Research Foundation, I think you just referenced this, Dr. Leppard. You've been fortunate enough to receive large grants through the Aircast Foundation, grants coming from the NIH, National Institute of Health, and also the Department of Defense. And I would imagine those are two organizations you would want to have on your side if you're raising money to help fund orthopedic research for soldiers, specifically who have experienced traumatic extremity injuries, the Department of Defense and also the National Institute of Health.
Yes, we have been fortunate to get the initial funding from the Department of Defense. We haven't gotten funding from the National Institutes of Health yet. Yet. We're hoping. We really focus on the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, as a marker for our investigators that we fund. If they get funding, if we can bridge the gap for them to get that type of funding, that's really a marker in their careers that they are going to be established. And so we always are looking at the NIH either both for funding for us as an organization, but also for our investigators.
Unfortunately, as we mentioned earlier, research into the area of orthopedic trauma has not kept pace with the increase in injuries, so there's a whole lot of injured service members, especially the soldiers, who are facing a new battle of recovery and rehabilitation and trying to re-enter civilian life or return to active duty. So research funding, it improves treatment outcomes, it decreases complications during recovery, and this means faster recovery from injury and greater return to duty rates, improved quality of life after service, and less money needed for long-term care and rehabilitation in military hospital systems. Probably, Dr. Leppard, when most people would hear that there was traumatic extremity damage to an arm, a leg, a foot, a hand, whether it was severely damaged, maybe you have lost the use of that limb, maybe it has been amputated. I'm sure a lot of people would immediately think long-term care and rehab in some military hospital system. But that situation has improved.
Absolutely, it's improved. I think one of the things that you see very frequently now, specific to these types of injuries, is the improvement that we've seen in prosthetics. The amputees are finding significant improvement in the prosthetics, and this has really helped their improved care as they move on in life and their integration back into civilian life. The thing that I don't think a lot of us see is the steps that it takes for them to get to that downhill skiing event or that climbing Mount Everest event.
Oh, can you imagine?
These are extremely motivated, focused young men and women, and they want new challenges, and so they are continually pushing the envelope to look for better ways to be cared for in addressing these types of injuries.
Imagine trying to think about going back to skiing if you've lost a leg in Iraq or Afghanistan, or going back to even playing catch if you have children, softball with your kids if you lost a hand or an arm in Iraq or Afghanistan. And the Airlift Research Foundation, their mission is to fund research and raise awareness that improves the care of military and civilian survivors of traumatic extremity injuries. The Airlift Research Foundation understands the need to support critically needed innovative research that returns injured troops and civilians to maximal function, empowering those who have lost limbs or their limb function. And the foundation helps to invest public funds into the careers of the world's best and brightest clinician scientists, as Dr. Leppard was talking about, so that these people, these brilliant people, the scientists, the researchers, they can make advances that will be made in orthopedic trauma medicine. And right now, the Airlift Research Foundation is funding projects of all these young, brilliant scientists. They're addressing the protection of limbs, the treatment of traumatic orthopedic injuries in the field, rehabilitation, and quality of life. www.airliftrf.org, 412-661-7538. Dr. Leppard is president of the foundation, and again, the mission to fund research and raise awareness, improving the care of military and civilian survivors of traumatic extremity injuries. Is there anything we've forgotten about this morning, or something you'd like to add?
I just would like to add, Sean, that I think we hear an awful lot about PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, and TBI, which is the traumatic brain injury, and I think that these obviously are significant injuries that are coming back from these two conflicts. The thing that I do think has been overlooked is that most frequently when we have service members who are suffering these types of injuries, they also come back with extremity trauma, and the dollars also need to be looking at how we address the whole person. PTSD and TBI are a significant part of that person. Their limbs are another significant part. And so we really are trying to enforce that we are trying to help in the care of the overall person as they come back after having served so bravely for our country. The only other thing I would say is that we're really excited with the investigators that we've funded to date. As I mentioned, we're a very young organization. We had our first research grant cycle in 2009.
About a year old.
Exactly. And our grants are for $200,000. They're spread over a 2-year period. And the two that we funded initially, we're really excited to see how well they're doing with their careers based upon the funding that we were able to invest in them. One has brought in already $4 million from extramural funding from the NIH, the National Institute of Health, as well as the Department of Defense, which is really for us a 200-time investment of that initial $200,000. Both of the investigators we funded have been successful in obtaining some patents and beginning to get some industry interested. And for us, that's a critical step as well, because it shows that if we truly are wanting to fund things that are going to make a difference in that short window of a 5 to 7 year period, industry needs to get involved and interested pretty quickly so that it can begin to actually have an application to the care of these types of injuries, both for our military as well as our civilian population.
That's the president of the Airlift Research Foundation, Dr. Susan Leppard, and their mission again to fund research and raise awareness that improves the care of military and civilian survivors of traumatic extremity injuries. www.airliftrf.org, 412-661-7538. Good luck to you, Dr. Leppard.
Thanks so much for your help with this, Sean. I can't thank you enough, and I really thank your listeners for any interest. We are always looking for partners, both as volunteers and obviously donations, so thank you again.
This has been Pittsburgh Sunday Morning. My name's Sean McDowell.